We're on the 206 today, and we're going to up them up there. We're on the 206 today, and we're going to upgrade the brakes to these. Oh yeah! That's really heavy. I'm going to put these big bad boys on them. Oh yeah! Hi Ziggy, you gonna help? Good girl. Let's do it. Right, let's show you what you're gonna need. Right, you'll note I'm in the slightly relaxed position here. It's because the old foot hasn't quite healed yet. If you followed some progress at all, you notice I bust my foot a little while ago. Hasn't really been healthy. Sit. Or just ignore me. Anyway, so these are our big brakes, these are our little brakes, we'll show you those a little bit later on. But there's a fair old difference, 266mm across the disc face, not that big, and they're pretty worn out and they're old. So you've got a couple of options, you've got GTI brakes, which I did buy a set of calipers for, and then these came up from a friend, thank you Dum Dum for those, at a great price. So these are 302mm across the face. And obviously it's not just about the width, it's about the width of the actual area, the pad area, and of course these huge calipers which weigh an absolute ton. So you do end up gaining a bit of unsprung weight, unsprung mass, but there we go, that's life, isn't it? What you're going to need to do this brake upgrade, you're going to need your brakes. This guide will apply if you're putting GTI brakes on, or if you're putting these big bad boys on. These are from the Citroen C4, if I'm correctly reminded there by someone, hopefully. I don't want that, thank you Ziggy, that's disgusting and old, thank you. So, you've got your brakes. I'm choosing these 300mm, 302mm C4 brakes. They are a direct bolt-on, which is great. You could use this guide for the GTI ones as well, if you've only got the little puny ones. You'll need something to clean off the face, so this is a special little pad here. A wire wheel will do, you're going to have to be careful with wire wheel. On a drill is very helpful. That will clean off the hub face that sits between that and the disc, which is very important. Maybe a light will be handy. Screwdriver, a couple of spanners. I've got a 13mm spanner and a 17mm spanner. That's to get the old ones off. You'll need a socket set. I've got a torque set here. Some people call that a star drive, but it is a torque, six-sided. And the Allen key headed torque socket set. Probably a technical term for that. Some big old pliers here. I use these to squeeze the calipers in, the actual piston itself. You might need to do that. You could have a professional tool as well. And I use one of these. You can see that. It's very, very handy. It's like £2 or £3 it costs. And that will just clamp off the brake hose. You could just use some pliers and a clamp, but these are really good for not cutting them or pinching them. You'll need that, otherwise you'll be dripping fluid everywhere. Wire brush. Got some rag, little box for bolts, that's always handy. Some gloves if you're bothered about that. We've got a jack, axle stand, a brace to get the wheels off with a 19mm also to get the calipers off. Caliper bolts are really strong and really tight. And then we've got some copper grease, a little bit of lube, spray, some Triple X stuff, I've been loving that recently. Some fluid and a way to break your bleed your brakes, not break your bleeds. I use a tube with a one-way valve, and I can do that by myself. You can use an easy bleed system, you could just use a tube with a mate, that would be really handy. But I use this and I can do that myself. I'll show you that later. And there's one little bit I've missed out, and that's you're going to need probably an 8mm, 9mm, 10mm, 11mm, depending on the nipple size, just to break the nipples off. Don't break them off completely, as in, we call them cracking them off. So you just undo it enough to bleed the brake fluid through. That should be everything we need. If there's anything else, I'll cover it as we go. So let's get the car up, wheels off, and have a look at what we got. Sound? So here are our puny little brakes. Not completely finished or worn, but they're on their way out. Now, traditionally, these braided lines aren't great for squeezing. I'm going to give them a little squeeze. If you've just got the usual rubber hose, that's fine. Braided lines don't seem to like it so much. After all, they're braided. They do have a silicone inner, so we'll just give them a little pinch you do have to be careful not to damage them. Just give them a little pinch, but we're going to be prepared that it's going to drip a little bit. Right. Just going to clean off where our braided line goes in and give that a little bit of a spray. And then we'll get the spanner that I forgot to tell you about, which looks like it's going to be a 12. 11 now. These are often 11s. There we go. And make sure she'll be free. She is. The handy thing with braid lines is that they rotate often on the end, but you might find that you'll have to take the caliper off and spin it off your brake hose. In my case, which is really handy, we have this situation where the end of the braided line has a rotated coupling, so the hose doesn't spin, but the fitting does. Really useful. Now we're just going to get, oh actually it doesn't matter so much. I was going to say, clean that off if you're just going to replace it with the same caliper. And yeah, she's dripping, so we're going to get a little bottle for that. We don't want brake fluid dripping everywhere. There we go. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that if you can't shut off the brake fluid, you're going to have to do two things. Now I'm collecting this because brake fluid wasn't changed too long ago. If it was, just discard it in the legal and safe and environmental manner. Otherwise, save it to put it back on after. To put it back in, I should say, because the fluid is clean, but you're going to have to work fairly quickly, so you just don't lose all your brake fluid out of your master reservoir and end up bleeding all your brakes out. Right, we seem to have just pinched it a little bit more and got it, but I've got to be careful with that. I don't like pinching braided lines. I really don't. So that was an 11mm to get onto that, so you'll need that. Right, the next thing is to get this caliper off. The simplest way is to try and just push the caliper back, which just squirts brake fluid everywhere, so don't do what I just did there. Always put a cloth over it. I hate brake fluid. Well, I like it in its brakes, I don't like it outside of brakes. There we go. And then what we can do is just remove the two 19s which are behind here, okay? 19mm. Now the likelihood is they're going to be really tight. So I've got a big old bar on it. We're going to give them a good... excuse my arm. No, that's not square on that, I don't like that. If that's as far around as that goes. Not quite. So, let's try that again. There she goes. So I'm just using a breaker bar here. You could use a wheel wrench as long as you keep it on square. But it's going to be tight. Just to warn you, it's going to be tight. You want to reuse these bolts, so don't go munching them like I'm about to. Right, once they've cracked off, once you've released that initial part of how tight they are, then they should come out a lot freer. See, these are 19mm. And some of the 306s, they're like a big Torx. It's a stupid idea putting that much torque on a Torx, but there we go. That's what they do. That's what they do best. I'm just going to get a little extension here. I'll be honest, it's always good to have an array of tools rather than just being specific about. Get asked like, what exact tools do I need? Well, you often just find you need little bits as you go along. Like, I don't think about it too much, to be honest. I should do. But, oh look, I need an extension, you know? Just to make it easy. You don't have to, but it makes the job a lot easier. Breaker bar, I just always have one around. But you don't always need it if it's not too tight. It's not too tight, is it? Right, we're going to need to keep that, so we'll drop that in our little box, which you've got just to my left. It's always handy having a little parts box. Otherwise all your bits get messy and you get crud in them. And hope you can see alright. I'm trying to work on my angles a little bit and sound quality and all the rest of it, but Hollywood have yet to give me a budget. Right. Before you panic and you think you're going to see hours of this, I will speed up the little bits that are boring. Right. She won't quite come off, so we're just going to try and bring back this caliper a little bit more. You could do this with a line on it, but you'll find there's a lot more pressure in the system. But then, this isn't exactly an ideal situation either. Now, it's just because there's a lip between the brake pad, there we go, and the disc. Oh, brake pads aren't too bad. They were squealing like a mouse in a vice. I don't actually do that, just a metaphor. Right. So that's our old diddy little caliper. You can hold that comfortably with one hand, unlike the new ones. And then what we've got here is the old disc. So, you'll have two retaining screws, usually. Fortunately, one's been lost at some point, likely that's probably sheared off. Hopefully, if someone's been smart here, they've copper greased it, which is always good. And it's not too tight. Perfect. This is just a locating screw, so there's no real need for massive torque to be put on these. It just helps you locate them. Oh, I didn't mention a hammer earlier, did I? Nah, I didn't. Wow. Yeah, it's never good to put really grease where you don't think it should be put, but sometimes it's very useful. So, let's get the little tachometer. If you're going to reuse these discs, for whatever reason you were doing a hub or whatever, then I wouldn't use this. I'd use a hide hammer, for instance. There we go. Sometimes a little shock just gets them off. Ugh, they're rubbish. All the crud on those. Right, so hope you can see well enough. Just bring you in for a second. There's all that rubbish on there. And what happens is if you put a new disc onto that face, then you'll get vibration under braking, basically. Yeah, it looks like someone did shear off a bolt on that other hole, so we've only got one to play with. So let's get the drill out and buzz that off. That's done the job though. Right. So the next simple thing is to get our disc, a new replacement disc. Here it is. And the previous owners kept that face nice and clean actually. I don't know if you can see that. It looks a bit grubby. But actually he's put a little bit, just a little bit, I'm saying here, alright? Don't get me quoted on putting copper grease here in there. But just a dab of copper grease makes all the difference on a spot like that. Clean that up. I've put a box there just because I don't like the floor getting covered in dirt and brake fluid and all sorts of other stuff. As I was just saying, I'm just going to, the tiniest bit. Now if you apply the right amount it won't be a problem. If you put lashes of copper slip on here now, it's going to be a major problem. But these materials, they build up rust and grime in between them, which is going to happen. But you can help yourself a little bit when it comes to maintenance by just the tiniest little bit of copper slip in the right places in the right quantities. So I'm literally putting you can hardly probably see it on the video, and that's about right then. That's the tiniest bit on my finger, just smoothed on that face, just so that in future times, whenever you might need to get this disc off, which is likely, let's be honest, this is maintenance, you're not going to have a problem. So, let's get that lined up. Oh, we're missing a hole. There it is. There we go. And then we get that little tiny screw. That little tiny screw there, you're probably going to just see it. Dab of grease on that. Wind that in. It's just a retaining screw, so hand tight like that is just fine. No more than that. I'll give this disc off a proper clean in a second, because you like to get bits of grease and crud on it. Now obviously you could be using new discs and pads. I would recommend that if I'm honest. But in this circumstance, these discs have hardly done any miles, neither of the pads, and they were an absolute steal. So, again, thank you Chris, thank you Dum Dum, for that. So we're going to get our new calipers. So what we've done here is we've taken the caliper down to its, excuse me, my face, my major components. So these two sliders unbolt 7mm on these big 300mm brakes. I'm going to put a bit of grease on those later, they're really dry. But I've broken it down, it's much easier to rebuild. I'm making sure everything is nicely serviced and greased. So I'm getting a bit of, I've got a bit of wire brush on those. And I cleaned those off. And on the sections where the brake pads slide, so they've got little ears, brake pads, and they slide through. Now you don't want to get anything in this gap here, or here, because the disc runs through there. And while grease in the right place on brakes is excellent, in the wrong place kind of defies the whole idea. But don't laugh, I have seen people put grease between the face of a pad and disc to stop brake squeal. And oh yeah, it'll stop brake squeal alright. So that's a little bit there. Then we're going to fit our bolts. Remember, they were very tight. You might use a breaker bar to undo them. You do not use a breaker bar to tighten something up. You use a torque wrench. But as mine's about 100 yards away in the other workshop, and I've got a busted foot, I'm going to use PT. Not FT, PT. PT is piggy torque. But I'll try and find the official torque specs. There is torque specs for these bolts, and it is really tight, so you can use a torque wrench, or if you're not without a torque wrench, then a big bar. Carefully applied. So I am going to use the breaker bar, but I would not recommend it because you can break stuff. Go easy on these, people. Do not overdo it. Otherwise, you'll snap these bolts off and you'll never get them out. You'll just have to go and get another hub, which is a whole nother job. So I'm doing them tight with a 3/8, but you're not going to get them tight enough with a 3/8 in my opinion. I mean, you can get them close. And then we're just going to take that last little bit up, like that. There we go. That's all they'll need. And then the next step is to get our pads. Now they're hardly worn, and they have been, hopefully you can see on that, oh there we go, they have been greased before, but we're going to put a little bit of grease on them still. So you just put a bit of grease on those ears. I would normally actually use ceramic grease, which is a bit nicer than this stuff, but I've run out. So I'm sticking to my copper grease. Ceramic grease is kind of whitish grey colour, and it's great stuff. But this is going to do for me. Now this pad, I'd like to just slide that in, but actually this pad, you can see it's got this retaining clip that sits in the caliper itself, so we're going to have to get that caliper now and look about fitting it. So I'm just going to leave that ready. And I get these little puppies here greased up. Cardboard little box also doesn't just stop muck getting everywhere, it also stops, if you've got a dirty drive like me, muck getting onto your grease components. So there we go. Now I know there's arguments for and against thread locking bolts like that. I say if they're tight, they've got a little bit of grease on them, one, they'll come undone easy enough. When you need to come undone, if you do them up right, then they're not going to come undone just from vibration. It's not going to be a problem. So this is where, if you've got a normal hose, you either have to do two things: take it off up here, which is where it connects to the hard line, or in this circumstance you'd have to hold the caliper and twist it on the thread. You have to be really careful with that. So it all depends how easy that top connection would come off. Thankfully I don't have that problem. The reason I don't have that problem is on a braided line the end spins real nice, which is really good news for me. For you, if you haven't got that, it's not great news. So these big calipers, the old pad slides in like that, and then slides on like that. Sort of like that. There we go. Well, it squirts brake fluid everywhere. It's going to do that if you're pushing in on it, to be fair. So just be aware of that. It's pretty corrosive stuff, brake fluid, and actually quite flammable, as I found recently. Let's not talk about that. So make sure that thread now, before you do it, is clean, absolutely pristine. Again, I'm a bit old school. I like to just stick tiniest little bit on the thread, not on the seat, so not on this end here, that was bad, but on the thread. Nothing worse than one of those snapping off in your brakes. So here we go. This is the moment of truth where we find the thread doesn't match. You don't want to be cross threading these at all, not even a joke. They've gone in now. You just have to take your time there. I wasn't going to start razzing that in there and have a ruined brake line, brake hose, and a ruined caliper. You just have to take your time, find the thread, make sure it's clean, and then once you're in, you are in. Now, this is easier for me. You're going to have, if you're going to have a rubber brake hose, then the likelihood is you've got you'll have a brake hose which is fixed, unlike this one. So we're just going to let that off just for a second. There we go. That can release that little bit of pressure in the brake line. Okay, so the next step, as I say, they're 7mm. A lot of kits don't hold 7mm, so be warned of that. And find our bolt alignment in the back. Again, don't just razz these in. These are actually quite delicate threads, stupidly enough. Same with very similar design to the old Pugs, to the old Fords. These. Just go steady on them. And don't do the top one up real tight and then find you can't get the bottom one in. So just go up so far. Notice I've got these greased up as well. Now there's a couple of caps missing, unfortunately, off these, but there's normally caps that sit on the back of there. I've got some for the other caliper. I'll keep an eye out for it. Scrapyards, I think. There we go, straight in. Oh, win. Now, while I'm just doing this up, I haven't painted these or anything. There's a simple reason for that, is that this car's staying quite OEM, i.e. kind of looking quite original as possible, to be honest. I know it's got big brakes on it now and some 16-inch wheels, but if you want to paint them, that's a good opportunity, obviously, when you've got them off the car. See a link in my description I've got for stripping the rust off these really easily, using electrolysis. Really handy. Thanks, Cully, for pointing that out, and I did a little guide for it. Brilliant. I've done it on some other calipers with some great success. Right, now what I'm going to do now, let's just highlight as well to you right at this point, you're going to need big wheels for these. The 206 GTI brakes will fit over 15-inch wheels, just about, but these will not. So you're going to need 16-inch wheels for these. Don't even think about over 15s unless they've got some ridiculous offset, so keep them away from the caliper. So I'm just putting a little bit of freeing oil and just clean off this nipple. I hope it's free, and if it's not, I'm going to lynch Dum Dum. In the meantime, while that's just soaking in, I want to make sure our brake line's going to be okay. Yep, that looks good. I'm going to finish pinching off that 11mm. It doesn't need to be too tight. There we go. And then there's a little clip which goes on these, which you didn't see on the others. Let me bring my light round. Ah, that's hot. I need a new light so badly. It's too bright, it's too unreliable. It's too hot. Right, so there's like a little clip here. Can you see that? Many different ways you can try and get these clips on. It's often just kind of a bit of fiddly guesswork and a little bit of a tap. Basically you get one hook in on that edge there, bend it round, put it in that hole, tap it in. Maybe I did that a bit quick for you because some people do struggle with that. Let me just do that again, and to just get it off you just flick it out on those holes. Like that, and then flick it out that hole. So I'm going to get that in, start there, then in the hole there, not fully in, and just half in that hole there, bend it down onto that second face, and then just tap it in. That just retains that caliper, stops lots of issues. So there we go, that's done. Now we're going to go and do the other side, and then we'll talk about bleeding these. New calipers on, we've had air going in and out of the lines, etc, etc, need to bleed them. So we've topped up the brake fluid pretty high so that we've given a bit of a leeway. Now what I would always do with these nipples is not try and undo them with a ring spanner because you'll round them off potentially, is do it with a 6-sided socket just to release them, and then you can use your spanner, which I've just done already. So now I can get my ring spanner on it and just release it. Now the first thing I would do with a bit of cloth is just open up that nipple and wait until naturally the air all escapes before you start banging some pressure through it. Very boring bit. And then what I'm going to do basically is once the air's come through, I'll just crack it off and then just to nip it up, and then I'll put this tube here with the correct orientation. See there's a little arrow on that, if you can see there. You see down there? A little arrow. To make sure that the fluid goes that way, and then there's no air that's going to come and return back up the line while I'm pumping on the brake. 3 should do it. I like to do 3, top up, and then do a couple extra just to make sure I've got no air in the system. I think we're going to have to force this one though. Let's just remove the nipple and make sure it's not blocked on the other end. There's the fluid coming up. Notice I've got a box on the floor, some rags in it just so I don't drip brake fluid everywhere. Right, if it doesn't, you've got to run a little wire through the nipple and through the hole to the side, which is down at the bottom here, just to clear out any gunk. So what we're going to do now is put our pipe nice and tight on there, and then we open up the nipple like that, goes into a bottle the other side, and now the fluid is slowly coming up there, but hopefully you should see, if I can get you in close enough and the camera's good enough, all the air out of it, but I want to make sure of it. So let's see if you can see the fluid. I'm going to check the fluid. I'm going to check the fluids coming through here, which you're probably going to know better than I am, because I wasn't watching that. I can hear it. And then I'm going to top the fluid up in the reservoir. So I'll show you what we've got going on here. Got my brake fluid. Brake reservoir on the 206 is a right pain. A few different people have different ways of dealing with it. Spill it everywhere. I often just make a piece of cardboard. I suppose I should make a proper little spout because I've got one and I use it regularly. But I just end up cutting a piece of cardboard in a little shape as a funnel, just so I can get it down there. I've topped it up ready. Not right to the brim because the caliper might need squeezing a little bit, which brings the brake fluid up in the reservoir, but I'm probably going to lose a little bit, so it's always good to top up first, and then you're not going to go below the level and then have to bleed the clutch out and all the rest of it. If it goes below the low mark, the clutch ends up getting air in it. So we'll give it another extra couple of pumps, just to make sure. And then shut that off, like that. Take that off, that drips everywhere because it's a one-way valve. Just pop that back in there. Right. Make sure we're happy that's tight. Clean that off. Brake cleaner I didn't mention at the beginning, but it's pretty essential on this job. Just to clean everything right off, and then if we apply some pressure now and come back to it, we should have no leaks. That's the idea. Brake pedal doesn't feel great at the moment because we've got loads of air in the other caliper, but that's fine. Wheel's not binding, and we've got no brake fluid over there. So we'll go and bleed the other side, and we'll be pretty much done. Right, so that's done. So we've gone from these puny little brakes to these, much bigger caliper, better design, bigger pad surface, bigger disc. I mentioned at the beginning we might need a 14 and a 17. Or 13 and 17. None of those were needed because we managed to just take the other calipers off all in one go. You will need an 11mm or similar to break the brake hose off. Sometimes they're 14. And then I found this was an 8mm nipple and the other one was a 9. Again, any calipers kind of between that. I also used a little bit of paper, wet and dry, and a little file just to rough up the edges of the pads. If you're using used pads, that's what to do. These pads are hardly used, but I just did it to help the bedding in process. Brake cleaner I also mentioned in the video, but didn't mention at the beginning. You're going to want that. Cleaning off brake fluid, cleaning off the discs. Brand new discs come with like an oiled surface on them to keep them from corroding, so you want to do that. To clean the discs off, you're also bound to get a little bit of grease on them at some point, so you want all that off as well, obviously. What's left to say? Well, I need to go and bed these in now. I've checked there's no leaks, we've bled it through, we've got no air, the brake fluid's at the right level, so we'll go and bed them in. New or partly used, I really would recommend new, but these were so cheap it's ridiculous, and they're so new anyway, literally brand new. You want to bed them in gently, so no really hard braking, don't go out and absolutely rag them. What you want to do is drive around very slowly in an area and try and basically have a little bit of throttle on and use the left foot on the brake. Just do that for a couple of 100 yards and then do a couple of gentle but firm stops. That's a bit of a contradiction, but not an emergency brake at about 30 miles an hour. Do a couple at 40, do a couple at 50, let them cool down, do a couple more at 30, and then just take it easy for the first 100 miles, 200 miles or so, and then you can really start pushing. Otherwise you will glaze them and all sorts of problems, and they'll start warping and all sorts of horrible things, so you don't want to do that. So just go easy, a few firm but not emergency brake type stops initially, just to bed them in. That's all you really want to do, and don't just do that and then stop, otherwise the pad's heat will just sit on there and it'll leave a little sort of embossed pad, and that'll give you brake vibration. So keep moving when you're warming them up, and then when you finish warming them up and you think you've bedded them, just go for a very gentle drive, just to wear any initial dust off and get that out of the way, and then come home. Don't come home on super hot brakes. That gives all sorts of problems. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this has helped. This is a great upgrade. You'll need 16-inch wheels for this, 15-inch wheels for the GTI brake setup. Obviously good pads and discs do make a good difference, as do tyres. Pilots having great brakes, decent tyres, but I'll leave you to do and think about that and Google it and argue it with all your forum friends on another day. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, hit the links. There's lots of other how-tos on the 206, the 306, all sorts of other French stuff. Occasionally there's an Astra. And comment if I think I've missed anything out. Let me know. If you need any comments, help comments. I don't know. Just I'm tired. It's early. Like the cockerel was crowing a second ago. That's how early it was. So thanks for watching. I'll try and edit some of the mumbling out. Hopefully it's been helpful. Oink out. Boom. Dash. Boost! Yeah. Should we do it this? I'm getting old. I'm getting old, people. I'm getting old.